Welcome to If Numbers Could Talk. My name is Keelan. If Numbers Could Talk is a part of the Thinkering Group. You can find us over at thinkering.space. You can also find at Thinkering Space the Thinkering Talks podcast, the Exofathom podcast, along with the Plank Talks with Joe. When you get a chance, please check out our merchandise. We have merchandise on our website, thinkering.space, as well as merchandise at teespring.com/thinkering-shop. Please visit, grab a t-shirt, grab a mug. We'll appreciate it. And when you do, feel free to let us know that you've decided to become a member of any of our fan clubs. Today's episode of If Numbers Can Talk, If Numbers Could Talk, please do not change the name. If Numbers Could Talk today will be a little shorter than usual. And today we will be taking the time to look at brands, not just any brands, not brands that just fell off the tree. Well, in a sense, these brands did fall off the tree. So let's rephrase that. Not brands that just came out of the blue, not brands that were started out of any type of need by the time they were created. Brands that were created out of somebody's spite. Brands that were created out of somebody, just the desire to continue without the counterpart. This is If Numbers Could Talk. My name is Keelan. Thank you for coming, and let's get started. So today's episode is going to be based around a few things. Numbers, of course, numbers are always going to be our basis. But today's episode is going to be a little different. It's going to talk about a family, one singular family that created two separate brands. And we're going to use as many numbers as we could find. Well, not all the numbers we could find. There were a little too many numbers. If you understand or if you know, the DASSLER brothers began making shoes as of today around 101 years ago when Adolf Dassler began in 1919. And it is said that Rudolf Dassler, his brother, joined him around 1924. And that's when they began Gita, which is Gebruder Dassler. It's a shoe factory, or what they would call in the UK a textiling manufacturer. And that's because when you deal with any type of fabric, I believe they consider you textile. I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the Dassler brothers began creating shoes early in life, early around 1919. From 1919 to around 1945, I want to say, no, around 1947 is how long they were the Gebruder Dassler shoe company, or a shoe creator, shoe factory. It wasn't until 1948 that they split the entity and become ADIDAS and PUMA, respectively. Before that, they were known as Gita. Again, Gebruder Dassler shoe factory. It was a two-stripe sneaker, and it wasn't until later that ADIDAS, Adolf Dassler, after the split, purchased the three-stripe logo from another company that clearly he was doing better than if he could buy their logo off of them. So long before those two companies came about, they were, again, one company, the Dassler brother shoe factory. And it wasn't until 1927 that they had to move out of their mother's laundry room, which is where they created shoes for a while, where they created their product together, occasionally having to, it was really interesting researching this. Anyone, if you want to look up more, if you want to learn more information before I continue, take the time to Google the Dassler brothers and their history. Business Insider had a really good article I read. And there was a lot of assorted articles through time, But I want to say the Business Insider article I read was probably the best. And then if you understand, or if you simply follow financial or business type news, those are probably the best places that I found to get a lot of good information as far as the company's history as a company. When it comes to, which we'll get to later, their sponsors and other endeavors, you had to really look through some of this stuff. And that's why I absolutely enjoy doing this. I'm only looking up things I'm interested in. And if I get something that I'm not interested in, I look it up, and by the end of it, I am interested in it. So believe me when I say everything that I cover, everything that I talk about, I do my research, and I am thoroughly satisfied usually by the end of my research. And that's when I come to terms of understanding what I have in front of me and how and what I am going to present. Now, as I said, in 1927 is when the gentlemen decided they needed to move out of their mother's laundry room. They had 12 employees at that point, and they had to upgrade. They had to find a factory. They had to find an actual place to distribute a place to create their goods so that they could distribute. And again, this is before anyone knew of an ADIDAS or a PUMA. They were the DASSLER shoe factory. Now, during that time, so many things happen as the Gebruder, and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that. Gebruder. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but the Dassler Brothers Shoe Company, they did everything from supplying the Nazis with boots. They were primarily the suppliers for football companies, or what we would call in America soccer teams. And it wasn't until 1936 that they really started to gain acclaim, again, before Adidas and before Puma. This is setting the foundation for the ability to split and create those two entities that exist today. So it was around 1936 that they gained acclaim, and it was only because of the athletes that they represented in the 1936 Olympics. They have represented plenty of athletes before. There were other athletes who had come around, who had contracts with them. And it was 1936 when they represented athletes who brought in a total of 7 gold medals, 5 silver and bronze medals altogether. So a total of 12 medals. 4 of those gold medals belong to Jesse Owens. 4 of those medals belong to Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens had struck a deal with Adolf Dassler, with the business people who worked for Adolf Dassler, and they went to Jesse Owens or Jesse Owens people, and they brokered a deal. That deal was brokered for $120,000. No, excuse me. That is a different deal that I will get to a little later. That deal was brokered, and the guy won 4 gold medals wearing what I believe were the first cleated or the first spiked shoe, which would be now considered cleated. And Jesse Owens did that. Secretly, of course, at the time, no one could know that he was representing or wearing a shoe that was of a German manufacturer. But that's what was happening, and that's what did happen. So that, for me, non-number related, if anyone's ever heard of somewhat of a joke or just reference that, Hitler had it out for Jesse Owens, or, he looked to Jesse Owens in a particular way, I now think I understand in a different light as to why. I don't believe that the same guy who's supplying boots to the Nazis is going to supply something to an enemy, if that is what they considered Jesse Owens at the time. Not what they considered America, but what they considered Jesse Owens. They clearly appreciated what he did or saw the value. I can't really say I understand it, but from a business aspect, it is definitely different, and it makes more sense to me that even back then you would see what kind of value was in someone else when they had your product, depending on what arena they were in as well. And I think that's what happened there. And it worked. 4 gold medals for Jesse Owens wearing Adolf Adolf Dassler's spiked shoe, cleated shoe. So after 1936 came 1939, the beginning of World War II. Now, all the way, even through World War II, the Dassler Brothers Shoe Company was still in effect. They were still doing their thing. Again, they were supplying boots. They were still supplying shoes for sporting events and different types of sports shoe in different capacities. As we see in 1936, the Dassler Brothers Shoe Company was pretty much already worldwide if Jesse Owens was wearing their apparel. In 1945 is when World War II ended. And that is when Rudolf Dassler, who both brothers were in the Nazi camp, I guess, or, they did their time in Germany, or they did their military time under the Nazi regime. I'm not sure exactly what that means to some. For me, it means they were a victim of their circumstance at the time. You have to consider when you're doing business specifically, this is not a disclaimer in any way. This is an understanding that when you're doing business, sometimes you're going to put your beliefs below your bottom line. And I believe that between 1945 and 1948, when the brothers grew a rivalry, there was a rift between them. They separated. They even ended up being buried on two opposite ends of the cemetery of the town they grew up in. The town itself also became split when the brothers split because of the branding split. I believe that may have come somewhere between the discussion of, love of country and love of business. Just how I would fathom that to go. From 1945 to 1948, there becomes the split. 1948, the two companies are born. 1949 is when Puma officially moves into production. 1948, Adidas and Puma are both born, and both companies move forward. Now, from this point of the episode, they are no longer the Dassler Brother Shoe Company. They are now Adidas and Puma. Puma was originally named Ruda until it was changed to Puma later. For anyone who has not figured it out by this point, Adidas, Adolf Dassler, ADIDAS. The I am not sure. Maybe that's a middle name. And for Rudolf Dassler, the original name of Puma, Rudolf, R-U, Dassler. It's not that hard, guys. Sometimes when we're thinking about branding, we're just trying to impress people, and I don't think that's what happened here. Puma, again, was the name of Ruda, and I believe it was the first year of creation that it was then changed. It did not last any time as Ruda. Now let's get to some juicy stuff. What are these companies worth today in today's era? I could not find any numbers. Excuse me, I lie. I could not originally find any numbers for 2020. And at first I was thinking, it may have something to do with the pandemic. It may have something to do with, just a lack of flow of information. I was wrong. I was looking in the wrong place. So I have accumulated some information to show you the revenue and value of these companies, say in 2018 and 2019. And I have current information from the last quarter, which ended in June. Let's get into it. Let's begin with Puma. And the reason we're going to begin with Puma is most people are aware of what Adidas is doing. They are very vocal. They're very out there, and they are into so many different arenas at this point. Everywhere you turn, there is an Adidas logo. Puma, however, not saying that they are not venturing out. They are definitely venturing out. I would say Puma takes the time to grow and nurture something, it seems. And they are not as quick to try to move into those other arenas. Some people would consider that bad. Some people would consider that good. Hey, it's all about how you believe you can operate. Now, Puma, as of 2019, according to Wikipedia, as of 2019, Puma had a revenue of 5.5 billion euro with an equity of 1.92 billion euro. And at that time of 2019, at the end of 2019, excuse me, for their yearly, they had a total of 4 billion in assets. Some people will understand everything I just said. Some people will not. Here, let me explain it just in small detail. Puma made a substantial amount of money. However, Puma has nearly most of that money heading back out. So does that mean that Puma doesn't make money? No, Puma makes a lot of money. Puma has a lot of revenue flowing in and out at all times. What that says to me is Puma has gone a long way over their 72 years, as well as Adidas. But a lot of times people don't think, you know, I'm talking about a 72-year scale at this moment, but Puma 10, 15 years ago was not something that most people were into. You know, I want to say, if I remember correctly, or maybe this was just me, Puma was more so considered ladies wear, ladies active gear and those things. Not in a bad way. It's just, I don't remember a lot of guys finding the Puma athletic gear to be the in thing. There was time for Adidas, but I'll get there in a moment. Now, in March of 2020, for the first quarter of the year, Puma was listed to have 1.3 billion in revenue with a net of 36.2 million. As of June 2020, Puma was listed to have, sorry guys. In June 2020, Puma was listed to have 831 million euro in revenue with a net of negative 95.6 million as of June 2020. Wow, coronavirus. Wow. Now, before we get into the amount of employees that are employed, let's get over to let's get over to Adidas and Adidas value. What is their revenue? What is their equity for 2018? For whatever reason, the 2019 numbers for Adidas were not listed. In 2018, and if you ask me, it's unfortunate because I saw also that Puma was doing better in 2018 than they did in 2019. And of course, they're doing in 2020. So these numbers are going to look a little crazy for Adidas. But I think it will set the standard. It will set the precedence to understand that, or to begin to answer the question that I had on my mind as I did this research. That question is, were these companies built out of simple stubbornness? Was it expected to build generational wealth? Or was it just an accident? Like it just happened, right? Certain things just went the right way. There were certain decisions that were made appropriately down the line and or early on. That part I don't think could be known without looking at some of these things that I had to research. Or it could be even assumed. Let's not even say known. I don't think we could even take the time to fathom that question without looking into some of these things, the numbers, the revenue, sponsorships, and those things that go with it. Now, in 2018, Adidas had the revenue of 21.9 billion. They had the equity of 6.1 billion, both in euro, with 15.6 billion in assets. That is a lot of assets, guys. And when that is explaining that they have a lot of turnover. There's a lot coming in and a lot going out. Adidas, as well as Puma, but Adidas specifically has multiple branches. They are into a couple of different things, mostly apparel, fashion and things of that nature. But they even have 3 different genres of apparel: athletic wear, which is the classic stuff. They have a high fashion or high style line, and then, you know, your casual wear and the stuff that everybody else is already used to or aware of, I should say. So that in itself says a lot to me. Now, let's get to this year for Adidas. And what that says a lot about is it says a lot about what that business runs like. Again, I believe that Puma just sits a little longer with things and takes the time to say, how do we make this a Puma thing, versus Adidas seems to say, how do we make this a partnership? And then later into that partnership, how do I buy you out? It's what I see with my eyes and how my brain reads it. It's not a bad thing either. That's honestly good business. I'm going to get inside the door. I'm going to gain your trust. Oh, hey, I have enough money. If you would take this money, I can just get you out of here. So as of March of 2020, Adidas had a revenue of 4.73 billion in euro with a net of 31 million. As of June 2020, Adidas had 3.58 billion in euro with a net of negative 295 million dollars. That is the net. The net and assets pretty much work hand in hand, if you understand. In order to get to your net, you're going to have to pay all your bills, pay your taxes, pay your payroll, take care of all your assets and liabilities, basically. And a negative 295 million would be astronomical for most companies, for a good portion of companies. For Adidas, however, I don't think it's as bad as it looks on paper. I was a little discouraged to even report that in this episode, but I don't think it's as much of a slight as the average person would think it is. Again, keep in mind what type of revenue and that they have regularly. I believe once all of this is over, there are a lot of companies that lost plenty, small and large. I believe the larger companies will slap a Band-Aid over that with no problem, and they'll hardly notice at a certain point. That is not a slight. That is not really an assumption, but it is my opinion. Call it an assumption. I don't care. So once we get through how much money, the revenue, the foundation to building the companies to gain this type of revenue, Adidas and Puma all have to have employees. Without these employees, these companies don't run. Without these employees, that revenue doesn't matter. And without these employees, I'm not sure how you even have a net value, because a net income, because you are 1000% going to have employees. So let's start with Adidas. Adidas has worldwide 57,016 employees as of 2018. Puma has 14,332 employees as of 2019. Again, we are now moving into the back end of 2020. I am more than sure that neither of these companies hire the same number. I am almost sure that both of these companies are employing less people at the moment. Not necessarily because of coronavirus, but the benefit is a lot of the stores are closed. A lot of those places had to shut down. That's bad for the average worker, right? Doesn't really affect the consumer, and it saves money aside from having to pay rent, depending on how long those companies have to pay rent in those spots, and or if they're able to give up those locations and no longer have to pay that rent. That can be a huge save for a lot of companies. When you go on Google and you go to the finance section, you can look up most of your major companies that you're interested in. There's a section called cash on hand. When I see the cash on hand section, what that says to me is how much are you saving? What that says to me is how much can a company say, hey, you know what? That's how much I have towards the day. That's the cash on hand section, right? So I want to say it's still in the 200 millions for Adidas, even though it's in the negative 200 for the net. So again, and that not to even bring up Puma side, but just being clear, when we're talking about numbers in finance, sometimes the larger numbers aren't as detrimental as they look. Now, when you employ all those people and you have such a track record of 72 years, there's a timeline that begins to be built. And both of these companies have extensive timelines. So what I did is I pinpointed a couple of things that I thought were worth noting. In 1960, Puma was the first shoe company to use vulcanization. Vulcanization is a process that's used to harden the rubber or the leather and all of the other fabrics and materials that are used for our shoes today. Vulcanization is the process that is used to harden as shoes, or that they so that they can be more durable. I'll say it that way. In 1970, Pele was given $120,000 to wear Puma. To wear Puma in the World Cup finals. During those World Cup finals, not only did he wear the shoe, right around the last few minutes, he asked the referee for a couple more seconds so that he could bend down and tie his shoe on camera on internationally televised World Cup final. Pele did that for Puma, and trust me, it helped. Everyone had a few seconds to look and say, hey, what is that? Oh my God, that's a Puma shoe. And Pele's wearing it. Now, over time, there are a lot of other athletes. There are a lot of other accomplishments and things that happen through the Puma timeline. The next biggest thing I felt came from 1970. Again, there were plenty in between, but in 1998, Puma signed Serena Williams to a contract. In 1999, Puma was given the NFL apparel contract. And in 2000, which is really when everything commercially started to turn over, in my opinion, in 2000, Puma got a deal with Porsche and Sparco, which is a motorsport company. Those are things that nobody really talks about when it comes to Puma, because again, Puma is not in your face every 5 minutes. I honestly can't say I saw many Puma commercials until the last few years. Adidas, however, I can probably remember Adidas commercials back until I was like 2 or 3. Speaking of Adidas, let's get to the Adidas timeline. Now, in 2005, Adidas inserted a microchip into their shoe, creating the first intelligent shoe ever made. In 2006, Adidas landed a deal with the NBA to sponsor and supply all of their on-court apparel. In 2011, there was a sports complex that Adidas purchased, and they now have their own sporting complex, which is used for a multitude of things. In 2012, Adidas had their highest revenue year, 1 year after purchasing an entire sporting complex. And in 2015, Adidas created the first footwear app. That's the first application that is just for your shoe, for you to purchase and create your own shoes. Now, I would have thought that was Nike ID. However, the Nike ID has absolutely nothing to do with your actual shoes. It is just a purchase and create. The Adidas app actually connects to your shoe. Like, I don't know how else to explain that. So the timelines for these two companies, as you see, are extensive, extremely extensive. And what I found most interesting about their timelines for either of the two, it almost was like they didn't want to end the timelines. Like there were just so many accomplishments and or changes and or improvements over time that I am almost afraid to look up other shoe companies and find out how they compare. Because if they don't compare to either one of these, and I mean, Adidas is number 2 to Nike. Puma is in the top 5, but if these two companies in their timelines don't say a lot about how far shoe technology has come, then I don't know what shoe company would. I don't think even Nike, as far as technology wise, until you start getting to like the hyperdunks and things, I believe. Shoes are interesting. I might have to do more episodes on shoes, not just shoe technology, but when it comes to the numbers of shoes, no, I'm not talking about the Jordan numbers, but what sales actually look like for certain shoes. The foam posits I know are considered collectors to some, whereas a pair of Nike Cortez, you can find those on any corner almost, but in certain cities, like my city in LA, you got on a pair of Cortez. Ooh, get the Cortez at. So you just have to understand the process, like the timelines matter. Like those things actually come up. Now, also keep in mind, Puma, while now they have artists and things on their sponsorship lists and athletes, Adidas has really always, especially in hip hop, Adidas was a staple in hip hop a long time ago. So as far as sponsorships for both of these companies, I'm just going to read off these lists. And of course, as I said, Adidas has moved into a few more arenas than Puma has. But I believe, again, that Puma has moved efficiently into the arenas that they are involved in. So for Puma is involved with, or is sponsors, Puma sponsors in all of these different categories. And yes, they are plentiful. MMA, artists of all types. Water polo, track and field, rugby, netball, which is an Australian sport. Motorsports of all sorts. Golf, Gaelic games. Figure skating, fencing, cricket, volleyball, boxing, basketball, American football, Canadian football, FIFA football, soccer. I believe, what do they call that? They call that club football. Club football. Puma has also been a part of Olympic committees and sponsors esports teams. Adidas also sponsors esports teams, high schools and colleges around North America, multiple marathons, volleyball, track and field athletes, tennis athletes, swimming, snowboarding, skateboarding, rugby, motorsports of all sorts, lacrosse, ice hockey, field hockey, handball, golf, figure skating as well, fencing, cricket, boxing, Canadian football, American football, Australian football, NBA, club and national basketball, baseball, artists of all sorts, gymnastics, archery, club football, also known as soccer in America. And they also supply and sponsor, they sponsor NFL players while also supplying all of the balls and sponsoring multiple club football and soccer leagues around the world. Now, because we work with numbers, I know a lot of people would have been expecting me to literally just count all of those and say, hey, it's X amount of sponsorships for Puma and X amount of sponsorships for Adidas. But I'd rather not today. I would like to do something. For anyone watching this episode, take the time in the comment section. Let me know. On the Adidas side, how many sponsorships do they have? How many different arenas do they sponsor in? And on the Puma side, how many different arenas do they sponsor in? Who knows? Might just be a poll, might just be a contest, maybe it's a giveaway. Let me know in the comment section what you think, and I'll get back to you about it. What I would like to do now is discuss some things about myself and how I work with the whole Puma and Adidas thing. I like them both. I've never really had this, oh, Puma's better than Adidas or Adidas is better than Puma. Again, I do believe that there was a time in my life where I thought Puma was mainly for women. It was mainly promoted towards women. Aside from boxing, I think boxing is the only sport I could think of for a while, or the only male derivative thing. And there's female boxing as well. So I don't want anyone to think that's what I'm saying. What I mean is, for a while, I was not aware that Puma had anything outside of female athletic gear and just basic apparel that it never really seemed like they were in male cut, right? But I'm clearly not correct on that. That is my opinion. That is my thoughts. Those are my feelings. That is what I remember, and it is clearly not a correct memory. Or maybe it's the Mandela effect or something like that, an implanted memory into my head. But the two of these companies, during this research, there was so much information about the history of the families, the history of the town. Take the time to look into it. It's a lot of really interesting information. Also, as I was saying, the history of shoes, the shoe technology, shoe creation altogether, how it came about. I found a lot of those things while I was simply researching Adidas and Puma. And I knew ahead of time, I know some people were not aware of the Gebruder DASSLER shoe factory, which is the factory that the two brothers had originally before they split. I had a lot of fun researching this, as I have fun every time I'm researching. I have so much more I could have added to this, but I wanted to bring forward the things that I felt push these two companies to where they are today. Those staples that I mentioned, Jesse Owens, and a lot of that acclaim kind of getting attributed to Adidas. Pele and his let's call it what it is, his stunt during the World Cup finals, which if you look today, athletes do it all the time. There's always a moment where an athlete's, hey, I got to tie my shoe or something. And nowadays it's really not to sell or market anything. It's just to bide time. And I love it. When you're watching professionalism, or when you're watching professionals, you have to understand professionalism through their eyes. And that's what he felt was necessary, not as a professional soccer player at that time, not as a professional footballer, but as a professional in all terms, as a businessman, as a brand, as a marketing tool. That's what he felt was necessary. I have spent an extra 2 minutes, bringing back the numbers, talking about simply how I felt about this research. I appreciate everyone who has stuck around to listen. I appreciate everyone who tunes in, who takes the time to ingest this information. Please take the time to visit us over at www.thinkering.space. At thinkering.space, you'll find all of our podcasts, the Thinkering Reports, Thinkering Talks, the Exofathom podcast, Plank Talks with Joe, and of course, If Numbers Could Talk. We also have merchandise and a few different sections that we're working on and trying to bring more content to you. So if you could, if you would, and if you have any great ideas for us, jump on over and drop us an email at dive@thinkering.space and let us know how you feel. Let us know what you think and what we should add. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Have a great one.